fantastic that you guys are here joining me today to talk about books and reading and writing and the creative process. So I thought we could do this a little bit informally since this is just a nice small group. I'm going to talk a bit about my books and my writing process, particularly how I came up with the idea for the Blackbird Girls. This is my newest book. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what it's like to be a writer, sort of what it's like to have that as your full-time career. I'm going to read just a little bit from the Blackbird Girls, and I also want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions because I know that is so, so important. But before I really jump in, I just want to let all of you, young students, young writers out there know that I think it is fabulous that you are doing writing camp and that you're going to book clubs like this. Is so wonderful because this is a great way, you guys, to nurture yourselves creatively. It's wonderful for you to also to be around other creative people, other creative kids like yourself. That's really a way to kind of feed your own creativity and get your own creative juices flowing. So I think it is so wonderful that you guys are here today. I also want to just give a little shout out because the woman who is moderating our discussion today, Marnie, she was actually my 6th grade English teacher. Yes. And even though that was 30 years ago, which is hard to believe, 30 years ago, but it is exactly 30 years since I had Marnie as my English teacher, I still remember to this day how encouraging Marnie was for my writing. I still have the notebook that I used in 6th grade to write down all of my stories. It had a yellow cover. And I still remember how Marnie, and I would just write these extremely long, detailed stories. And I still remember how much it meant to me that Marnie would read all of my stories. She would, no matter how long they were, she would write these very long, very encouraging notes in my notebook to tell me, keep going, great job. And that means a lot. So I hope that all of you have some grown-up in your life, whether it's a teacher, a parent, an aunt, librarian, somebody who is also really encouraging you. But if you have taken writing camp with Marnie, then you know that she is a very encouraging person and she will really help to nurture your writing talents. And also she'll remember you. She still remembers me all these years later. So that's an amazing teacher right there. Also, Serena Butch is one of the women who is sitting in on our phone chat today. And she was actually my librarian when I was growing up and was a huge influence on me. And I actually was a children's librarian for several years before I became an author. So I just want to just tell you guys that as much as you can, don't be afraid to approach some of the adults in your life, some of the teachers and librarians, and tell them, I love to write. Would you ever be interested in reading any of my stories? Because I bet you that they would be very interested in reading your stories and in talking to you about writing and in giving you a lot of encouragement and support along the way. That can be so important in a young person's life, a young artist, a young writer's life. So I hope that you can find that in your life. So I thought I'd start off, you guys, by talking a bit about the Blackbird Girls. This is my newest book. And before I jump in too much, I'm going to need to give you a little bit of background, and then I'm going to tell you how the idea for this book came to me. And it came to me back when I was 14 years old, if you can believe that. So this is a story that was a long time in the making. Now, I'm just going to sort of look at your screens to see if anyone nods their head, but have any of you guys heard of Chernobyl? Some of you are nodding yes. And I bet there's a number of you that haven't heard about it. So before I jump into talking about my story too much, I just need to give you a little bit of background just so you know what it is. So Chernobyl is, to this day, it is the worst nuclear disaster in history. and it occurred in 1986 in a country that doesn't actually exist anymore. This country was known as the Soviet Union. Today we call it Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. There's all these different countries that back then in 1986 were a conglomeration that was known as the Soviet Union. It was a huge country. It was, again, it was a communist country. It was sort of known as the big enemy of the United States. When I was a little girl growing up in the 80s and 90s, in books and movies, the Russians, the Soviets were always the bad guys. So in 1986, there was this terrible disaster in Ukraine, which was then part of the Soviet Union, and it was this nuclear explosion in a little village known as Chernobyl. So that's just sort of what I need you to know before I start to talk about my story idea, okay? It's just know it was a really bad explosion. It was worse than the one in Japan in 2001, okay? So back when I was in 9th grade, I started at Niskayuna High School, and on my very first day of school, I met this girl who just blew my socks off. I knew as soon as I met her that I wanted to be really good friends with her. Have you ever met somebody like that? As soon as you meet them and you start chatting with them, you're like, I really want to be friends with this person. That ever happened to you? Well, that happened to me with Victoria. She was the fastest talker I'd ever met. Very fast talker, very funny, and so confident and tiny. I was always very, very tall, one of the tallest girls in the grade, and she was teeny, so we were like this. And she had recently moved to Niskayuna. She and her family, she and her mom and her dad and her grandparents had immigrated to the United States from Ukraine after the Soviet Union had split apart. The country had sort of fallen apart. She and her family were able to basically get visas, and they were able to eventually immigrate to the United States after a couple of years. And she learned English, and then she ended up moving to Niskayuna because a synagogue in our town sponsored her and her family. So that's how Victoria came in 1994 to Niskayuna. But I didn't really know any of that when I first met her. I just knew that she was, Russian, and that she was so funny and really smart, and I just really hit it off with her. So that fall of 9th grade, I invited over a bunch of my friends for a sleepover. And Victoria, my new friend, was among them. We had a great time. And it had gotten to that point in the evening when we had eaten pizza and watched a movie and had popcorn. And we'd gotten to that point in the night we were all lying on the floor in our sleeping bags in a circle, sort of giggling and whispering in the dark. You all know what that part of the sleepover is like. And then one girl in the group started to complain about her parents. She said, oh, my mom and dad, they are always on my case. They don't trust me. They give me this curfew. They check over my homework. They're just not giving me enough freedom. So then, of course, the rest of us started complaining too about our parents, which is what you do when you're 14 years old, right? Your parents get on your nerves. You want some freedom. So we all started to complain about our parents. Everybody except my friend, Victoria. She got very quiet and she looked very uncomfortable. She started fiddling with the zipper on her sleeping bag. And when I looked at her, my heart sank. I thought, oh no, something is wrong. And at first I thought, maybe she doesn't understand what we're talking about and she feels left out. She spoke English really well, but it was not her first language, and she'd only been in the country a couple of years. I thought maybe she's, there's something that she's missing. So I went over to her. I said, Victoria, are you okay? She said, yeah, I'm fine, Anne, I'm fine. I said, no, you look upset. Are you sure you're okay? She said, well, you guys should not complain about your parents, she said. When I was little, I had to live without my parents for a whole year. And it was terrible. And I miss them so much. And you guys should never, ever complain about having parents who love you and are taking care of you. So we were all kind of like, really surprised. And then we're like, oh my gosh, we're really sorry. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. And then, of course, we all said, but why did you have to live without your parents for a whole year? We were so interested. And again, she looked a little embarrassed, and she said, when I was growing up, and she said, when I was 7 years old, the day actually of my 7th birthday, the Chernobyl nuclear power station near my house exploded, and I had to be evacuated, but my parents couldn't go with me, and I had to live without them for a year before I was allowed back. We all got really quiet, and we all said, oh, I'm sorry. And we could tell she didn't want to talk about it anymore. So we didn't bring it up again. And we sort of, started talking about other things. And the evening kind of changed. And then soon we were laughing about other things. But like all writers, and I bet a lot of you in this group have had that same feeling when you hear something, or you maybe read something in a book, something gives you that little spark, right? And there's a story. There is a story idea in what you just thought of. Well, when my friend Victoria said that she had lived near this nuclear power station that had exploded, I had shivers go down my spine. I said, that is a story idea. I want to write that story. So, but I didn't ask her anymore about it that night, of course. But the very next day, because I couldn't drive yet, I had my dad drive me over to Schenectady County Public Library to the main branch, and we got out some books on Chernobyl because I wanted to learn more about it. And so I read these books, and I was very, very interested, and I wanted to learn more. So as the years went on, I just said, someday I want to write a story about this. And it kind of, Chernobyl went sort of into the back of my head. But my friend Victoria and I have remained very, very close friends. She's still one of my closest friends to this day. And I'd always imagined that I'd write a story about Chernobyl and it'd be a survival story. But a couple of years ago, I said, out of the blue, this idea came to me, and I said, I want to write about Chernobyl, but I want this to be a story about friendship. I want this to be about a story about two girls who have to be evacuated, like my friend Victoria, but these are two girls who hate each other. And then they end up being evacuated together, and they end up having to get to know each other. And as they do, they realize that they have far more in common than they ever imagined. And eventually they develop a life-sustaining friendship. And once I realized that really the heart of my story was not a survival or adventure story, but it was a story about friendship, and that it was actually inspired by the friendship between me and Victoria, that was when this book took off for me. And I knew that I could finally write it because I finally hit upon the approach that I wanted to take. So it took a long time, obviously, 20 something years to come up with the actual idea. So that shows you never give up on a story idea. Sooner or later it will come around, and it'll make sense, and it'll be correct in your head. So what I ended up doing next was I interviewed my friend Victoria and her grandparents, who still live in Niskuna, and I interviewed them extensively about their experiences, and I took long, detailed notes. And then once I really had a ton of information, both from interviewing my friends and her family, and also from doing research on my own, then I was able to start sort of putting this story idea together, like different puzzle pieces blocking together, now that I had all these bits of information. And so that's sort of how that story idea came to be. You can see it was a really long process, right? And that's okay. When I was your age, I used to think that I needed to get that story idea. It had to be in my head, and I had to write it one time, and it had to come out perfectly the first time. Do any of you guys ever feel like that? Yeah. Yeah, I completely understand. That's exactly how I felt like I was when I was your age. And I thought, if I don't get the story right the first time, then it's no good. But that's really not true. It's really not. But at your age, I would say don't worry too much about revising and making the story perfect. I would say just write purely for the pleasure of writing, write purely for the joy of it. For me, one of the great joys of writing now is actually rewriting and revising. So the first time I wrote this, I was really just throwing words on a page, getting that story out, and then I could revise and dig deep into this book. So the basic premise for the Blackbird Girls is that it is the day of April 26, 1986, and two girls, Valentina and Oksana, wake up to find that the sky outside their apartment windows is bright red, and the fires and the power station in their town is on fire. Chernobyl has exploded. But nobody tells them this. It's a secret because back then the communist government wanted everything to seem perfect, right? Communism is supposed to be paradise. So the government tried to cover it up. So it's a Saturday morning and Valentina and Oksana have to head off to school like normal. And this has really happened, guys. So even though there's suddenly hundreds of police officers flooding their little town and there are tanks actually rolling down the street, everyone's pretending everything is normal and everything is fine. And so they have to go off to school like normal. But Valentina and Oksana both know that something is wrong because their dads who work at the nuclear power station on the night shift have not come home from work and they can't get in touch with them. Now, Valentina and Oksana have always hated each other. Oksana is sort of the golden girl of their grade. She's kind of the perfect girl. And she has bullied Valentina quite a bit because Valentina is Jewish. And back then in the Soviet Union, a lot of Jews were really discriminated against. And it was very, very common. Anti-Semitism was unfortunately very common. And so Oksana has been raised to dislike Jews, to distrust them. And that is why she doesn't like Valentina at all. So these two girls have a really bad relationship, very much an adversarial relationship. But a few days after the explosion, there's a tumultuous evacuation from their city, and they end up having to evacuate together all the way to Leningrad, which is over 1,000 miles away on the other part of the country. And they have to go there together, just the two girls, without any of their family members, to live with Valentina's grandmother. And what they will uncover both along the way and after they get there are a lot of family secrets. And they will also realize that your worst enemy can actually end up being your best friend. Okay, so that's really what the Blackbird Girls is about in a nutshell. I thought that I would read the first couple of pages to you so you can kind of see how the story begins. I thought I'd show you a little bit some of my other books, talk about those just a little bit, and we'll open it up for questions, okay? So this is the very beginning of the Blackbird Girls, right from chapter 1. I wanted you to get a sense of how eerie it is. Okay, chapter 1. And this is from Valentina's perspective. The two chapters go back and forth between Valentina. Valentina wondered where the birds had gone. They weren't waiting on the sill when she went to the sitting room window that morning. All year she had put slices of salami out for them. Blue jays came every day, and blackbirds sometimes, and sparrows least of all. The birds would stand on the sill, their claws black as soot against the gray concrete, and they would fly away when she unlatched the window, only to flutter back when she set out the pieces of salami. Today, though, they were nowhere in sight. Valentina leaned out to look. Overhead, no blue jays circled one another, vanishing into the clouds, then reappearing. There were no blackbirds or sparrows either. All of Pripyat's birds seemed to have disappeared. The sky was empty, except for a crimson glow in the distance. Valentina squinted. Usually at 7:30, the sky was the pale blue of a robin's egg. Not now. The sky in the south was red. Smoke churned up toward the scarlet-colored clouds. The smoke wasn't black or gray, but a strange, unearthly blue. It was so thick that Valentina couldn't see anything below or behind it. All she could see was the wall of smoke coiling up and up into the red sky, but she knew what stood under that billowing smoke. The nuclear power station where her father worked. She whirled away from the window. The power station is on fire. Her mother hurried out of the bedroom, buttoning the cuff of her blouse. What did you say? Valentina pointed at the window. Her mother joined her and gasped, Oh my God. Where's Papa? Valentina glanced at the empty kitchen table. Her father worked the night shift at the power station. Usually he was back in time to eat breakfast, tired and hungry after a long night. Then he would go to bed once Valentina had left for school. When he hadn't been at the kitchen table this morning, Valentina had assumed he was already in the bedroom. He hasn't come home yet. With shaking hands, Valentina's mother latched the window. Do you remember he said he would have a busy night? The supervisors were planning to run a safety drill. So when he didn't show up an hour ago, I wasn't worried. She pulled Valentina in close for a hug. I'm sure he's fine, Valieshka. If he was hurt, someone at the power station would have telephoned us. Valentina leaned into her mother, breathing in the comforting scent of her violet perfume. Mama had to be right. An accident at a nuclear power station was a statistical impossibility, a 1 in 10 million chance, her father had told her. And in school, she and her classmates were taught that nuclear power was the safest, cleanest source of energy in the world. It had brought heat and light for the first time to thousands of citizens in the Soviet Union. But why isn't the smoke black? She asked. Her mother held her tighter. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't send you to school, she murmured. But I have to go to work. And if we don't show up, people might talk. Valentina understood what her mother meant. They mustn't do anything out of the ordinary, ever, or they risked attracting attention. And attention was bad. It meant someone was watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake. And mistakes, like saying the wrong thing, criticizing the government, making someone important angry, that led the secret police to you. People who were taken away by the secret police, the KGB, often weren't seen again. When Valentina's mother was a university student, one of her classmates had been arrested by the KGB. The last time anyone had seen him was when he was shoved into the back of a car. Valentina's mother had never forgotten it. I want to stay home and wait for Papa, Valentina said. If Papa was injured, one of the other workers would have let us know, her mother replied. If we don't carry on as usual, we look as though we don't trust the people at the power station. And we mustn't risk attention, Valentina interrupted. She pulled herself free from her mother's embrace. But what if everybody's hurt and no one can telephone us? Then the hospital workers would call. Her mother gave her a gentle push toward the door. Papa's fine. Now you'd better hurry or you'll be late. And that is how Valentina's morning begins on the fateful day of April 26, 1986. And that's how the story opens up. If you hear a creaking door, that's my cat that just opened the door to my home office. She might come in for an appearance on the screen. We'll see. So that's the Blackbird Girls, which came out in March. It has been published by Penguin Putnam here, and it is coming out in the next few months in Russia, Italy, and the Czech Republic. So that's kind of fun. So I thought I would just show you briefly some of my other books, and then we will talk a little bit more. I can answer any questions that you have, okay? So, and I'm pretty sure Schenectady County Public Library has all of my books, and so does the Open Door. So my first books were a duology, again, historical fiction. This is for young adults, so people like 11, 12 and up. Prisoner of Night and Fog is the first book, and the sequel is Conspiracy of Blood and Smoke. And these are about a 17-year-old girl named Gretchen, and they are set in, well, it begins in Munich, Germany in 1931. And Gretchen has actually grown up in the Nazi Party ever since it was sort of just beginning. Her dad was in fact really close friends with Adolf Hitler before her dad died, before the story begins. And so Gretchen has sort of been raised as this kind of golden girl, poster child of the Nazi Party. And she's sort of this sort of pampered, spoiled girl who's been brainwashed into only thinking one way, into going along with Nazi ideology. Now, when the story begins in 1931, the Nazi Party is not yet in power, but they are poised to become the most powerful political force in all of Germany. And Gretchen has always gone along, just believing everything she's been taught. But then she meets a mysterious, handsome Jewish reporter who has shocking information about her father's death. And according to this reporter, her father did not die during a sort of street fight protecting Hitler's life. According to this reporter, her father was murdered by somebody else in the Nazi Party. At first, Gretchen doesn't believe him, but she begins to uncover all these inconsistencies in the story around her father's death. And she realizes that she needs to investigate. But the more she learns, the more she realizes that she has to question everything she's ever believed, and that this investigation into her dad's death could, in fact, result in her own death. So, sort of more of a thriller, sort of psychological thriller a bit. And then this is the sequel, which I can't talk too much about because it might spoil the ending of Prisoner of Night and Fog, but you need to read those in order. And then just for fun, I always love knowing about book covers. I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker for a good cover. I love knowing the stories about how do publishers come up with the covers. So this is Prisoner of Night and Fog by my Czechoslovakian publisher. And you can see the cover is very different. I think this looks much more like an adult book. You can see she's wearing a red coat, which they add these details. She doesn't actually have a red coat in the book, but it looks good on a cover. And then this is kind of fun. They changed my last name. My last name is Blankman. They changed it to Blankmanova because in the endings of people's names there show whether or not you were male or female. And so by having OVA at the end of my name, it was obvious that I was female. So they had changed my last name, which I thought was really cool and fun. This is the Dutch edition of Prisoner of Night and Fog. As you can see, it's actually the same image, but they've just changed the coloring a bit. They've kind of softened it. They changed the title. This is just Prisoner of the Night. We thought it sounded better in Dutch. Let's see. This is the UK cover of Prisoner of Night and Fog. And it has, this is called the tagline, which is that little sentence on the front of the book that's supposed to pull you in. It's called a tagline. In the UK, they call it a shout line, which I think is kind of fun. And it says, before he was Hitler, he was Gretchen's Uncle Dolph. And there was so much work that my British publisher put into that particular shout line, that tagline. A lot of work went into that. There's a lot of discussion about what it should be. And this is you can see, it looks like a totally different book, right? But this is the same book. It's the US edition. This is the UK edition. Again, very different, right? I don't want to run out of time, so I'm just going to talk very quickly about this other book. This is a standalone, which is when it's just one book in the series. You know, it's not a series, it's just one book, a one off. This is called Trade Angels, the historical adventure about a girl named Elizabeth. And in 1666, England, Elizabeth uncovers a incredible, terrifying secret hidden in her father, John Milton's epic masterpiece, Paradise Lost. And King Charles II's men are hot on her trail because they don't want this secret to get out. So it's kind of like a Da Vinci Code, but for younger readers. It was a lot of fun to write. It's sort of like a literary scavenger hunt across Restoration England while Elizabeth is scrambling to put together all of these clues that her father hid for her to put together and figure out what is the secret in Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is a real poem. It is a wonderful masterpiece. And John Milton was a real person. The main character, Elizabeth, was fictional. I kind of slid her in among all of John Milton's other daughters. And I had great fun writing this. This was just a real blast to write something so different and something a bit more lighthearted. So all of my story ideas have come to me in different ways. Sometimes I'm usually inspired by something that really happens to a real person. You know, I often will hear something or read something and I think, oh, I want to know more about that. I want to know why that happened, or, oh, there's a story there. And then that idea just kind of sits in my head for a long time while I do research, and the idea grows and grows and grows until it becomes a full-fledged novel. So I over now to Marnie, because I'm sure you guys have questions. And if you don't, oh, sorry, there comes one of my cats. And if you don't have questions, I can certainly talk on and on and on. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Marnie for a second and see if there's anything she wants to say.
Oh, well, gosh, I'm just in heaven myself. It's so wonderful to stay connected to my students, and it doesn't happen with all of them, and many who move away, of course, I don't stay connected to, but it just has been wonderful that Anne kept writing. And yeah, I would love to hear, you could mute yourselves, right? I don't have any plan for moderating per se. Just maybe you could raise your hand if you want to ask something, or even just comment. But certainly there's a lot to ask. I read Blackbird Girls last March, and then I read it again. And I was very moved by reading it again. You know, when you read a book sort of fast, but COVID was in between, and the meaning of friendship and having time to read, which often I don't, it made a big difference to read the book again slowly, and it's very powerful. Yeah.
Thank you, Marnie.
Oh, yes. So, who would just, any question at all would be wonderful. Yeah, good. Isabella.
Okay. Isabella?
So, can you unmute? Okay, you unmuted. Good.
Okay.
We're still not hearing you. You're talking, but for some reason, we're not hearing you.
Okay, we'll wait.
Take your time. It's okay.
Let's see who we got.
Okay, she's saying my audio is not up.
Her audio is not up.
Okay. You know, you can always type your question in the chat.
Yes,
you can do that, and then I can just repeat your question, and then we will we can take it from there. Do you want to do that? Okay.
Actually, others could type a question in at the same time, right? You know how to do the chat. It's you go down at the bottom where it says chat, and then the line will come up, and you can just put in another question too.
Absolutely. And if you don't have questions, or even if you just you have a comment, or if you want to talk Okay, here's Isabella's question. Oh, I love this question. I get this question every single time. How long does it take to write a novel like that? So this is the part where I say, how honest should I be? Because I don't want to discourage anybody. I'm not a fast writer. I have some friends. I have some friends actually who are fantasy novelists. One of them, she can crank out a whole book in 6 weeks. Just boom, it just flies out of her. I am not like that. Part of that is because I write historical fiction, and that takes me a long time because I do a lot of research before I even write that first word. I do a lot of research. For example, when I was writing Prisoner of Night and Fog, I mean, I was in a fog because I recently had a baby at the time. So I was in a brain fog. So it took me a really long time to write this one. So each book has been different, has been a different amount of time, at least a year, sometimes 2 years. It depends. It depends sort of on what else is going on in my life at the time, like with Prisoner of Night and Fog. That was super slow because I was working part-time as a librarian. I had a new baby. I was fitting it in when she was napping and at nighttime. So that was a long process. So what I'd rather sort of get into is don't be afraid to take your time with writing. Okay, I know when I was your age, I liked to just race through it, and that's great too. But also, if you want to take your time, that's wonderful. I think the main thing is you find a writing style and a writing sort of procedure, a writing process that works for you. And don't compare yourself to anybody else, because that there's a saying, it's called comparison is the thief of joy. And boy, is it true. When I was starting out as a writer, I would look at some of my friends, because I have a lot of friends, as I said, who write fantasy, and they can write a lot faster because they're making it all up in their heads. They don't have to do a lot of research. They're constructing these other worlds completely on their own by their own rules. My friends are very quick drafters. They write very fast. And I would think, gosh, what's wrong with me? I'm writing so slowly. But that's okay. You have to find a way to be true to yourself. Something that I do want to bring up in terms of timing is that when you write a book, when you sell a book, when your agent sells your book, it does not mean that it is going to be printed the next day, right? It actually, this always takes people by surprise. It's actually a long period of time between the day that your agent sells your book to a publisher and the day it actually comes out. It's usually about 2 years, which I know sounds like agony. Oh my goodness, I have to wait 2 whole years. But it's actually wonderful to have that much time. In the meantime, in those 2 years, you could be working on other manuscripts and other ideas. You will go back and forth with your editor on edits, because your editor will buy your book. They'll buy your manuscript, but they still want you to revise. So you probably have at least 6 months worth of revisions of going back and forth with your editor and fine tuning your manuscript until you both say, yes, that's it. And then it's still not done. Then it goes to copy editing. Now, copy editors have a really interesting job. They will read your book and look at several different aspects of your writing. They will make sure that all the grammar and punctuation is correct, but they also will look for continuity mistakes. So for example, I'm going to use an example from my first book. So in the beginning of the chapter, Gretchen was wearing a white shirt. And by the end of the chapter, it was green. It was magic. Oops. No, it was just I made a mistake. So they will catch things like that and they'll say, hey, this character's, her shirt color has changed. I have a friend who writes science fiction, and she didn't realize until her book went through edits for the first time that she would have characters enter a room twice. Because sometimes when you're revising a manuscript, you kind of forget what's already happened. So she would make that mistake. So once it's gone through copy editing, then it goes to sales and marketing. And then this is really fun. They figure out how they want to market your book, how they want to sell it. they also will create the cover for your book. And that's a very exciting day when your editor emails you and your agent and says, we have a cover. And then you get to see it, and then hopefully you cry tears of joy. So it's actually a long process from beginning to end. So writing is not for impatient people. Good things come to those who wait. But thank you for that question. That was a great question, Isabella.
Yes. Oh, good. Lots more. Looks
Oh,
like
good. Okay, so what tools do you use? Okay. Ooh, good question. So this, I want to answer this question by not just telling what I do, but what a couple of other authors do. Because again, you find what works for you. What I do is when I am scribbling down ideas, I use a notebook and pencil. And that is because it doesn't feel as like intimidating as sitting down to a computer and saying, okay, I've got to type this and it's got to be beautiful. No, I'm just scribbling down ideas, and it doesn't matter if it's good or bad, or I can, just rip the whole thing to shreds. Doesn't matter. But once I sit down to actually start writing, truly drafting, then I sit down on the computer, because I can type a lot faster than I can write by hand. I can delete, I can move things around. So I find it much, much easier that way. I know one woman who if she is feeling stuck, if she is feeling like she has the dreaded writer's block, she will not use her computer. And I think this is such a cool technique. She will always write by hand. She will blast the music and she will start writing by hand. And she says it's because it feels low stakes. And what she means by that, by calling it low stakes writing, is that sometimes we can get kind of intimidated when we sit down at the computer and we're staring at a blank screen, and we're just staring at it and saying, oh, please, will the words come? But if you just use a notebook, and you're not even really looking at the paper, you're kind of looking off to the side, just writing, the words will flow much more easily. And then once you start to flow again, then you can go back to the computer and start typing it up. But sometimes that's a good way, if you're feeling blocked, to sort of loosen that blockage and try something a little different. So great question.
Yes, great.
From Fiona. Oh, okay. Are you currently working on a book? So on Sunday, I finished drafting my next book. Woo! So it is with my my first readers right now. So get their reactions, and then I'm going to polish it up and make it pretty and send it to my agent. So yes. I have found that, well, I wouldn't say I found one particular process that always works for me, because every book has been different. But I have found that with each book that I write, I have learned so much about the writing process and about developing characters and about shaping a story. And so each time the process is really, really different, but it really is a joyful one, especially when you can hit print. Or you can type the end on the final page, and then you can go back and revise and make it beautiful. But the first time, I always tell people on that first draft, it doesn't matter if it's pretty or ugly or what, just get those words out on the page. You can always fix them later. Okay, so great question. All right, I think I may have missed a couple questions.
Yeah, there was one.
How many drafts? Okay. How many drafts do you really need before the book is ready to go to an agent? Good question. Okay, this has been very different for me with each of my manuscripts. But for me, 4 or 5 drafts at the bare minimum. I think Prisoner of Night and Fog was like 7 or 8 drafts before it went to an agent. And then it was still, then my editor and I still really heavily revised it as well. And that's for me, one of the joys of writing is that you're never done. Like, you can always improve your story. You can always tinker with it. You can always play with it. It's not like jobs where you can say, okay, I did that and now I'm done and I can move on to my next task. So I will give you one word of advice in terms of drafts and how many drafts you should write. You only have one chance to make a first impression with an agent or with a publisher, right? So you really want it to be your best, your absolute best effort. It is worth taking that extra time. My agent, who I adore, I'm so fortunate to be with her. She is one of the top children's agents in the country, children's literature agents in the country. And she said that the number one mistake she sees from submissions is people sending her manuscripts before they're ready. They will have a great idea and they will race through it. And she said, she's a really busy agent. She doesn't have time to edit a manuscript before she sends it out on submission to different publishers. She wants it to be good the first time she sees it. So take your time. It is worth it. It is worth to take your time with that manuscript. And also that's why when you're writing something, you want to fall in love with it, right? Maybe you're writing historical fiction and you are fascinated by that time period, or you really love your characters and you love spending time with them, or you've created this incredible, fantastical universe, right? Because you're writing high fantasy or science fiction and you're having fun exploring that. So I think that's part of the measures of a manuscript is, are you having fun writing it? Are you enjoying it? And I'm not saying every minute, because there are plenty of days when I am writing and it is painful. Writing is hard. It's really hard. But hopefully you're writing something that you love, you care about so much that you want to spend a lot of time with it to make it just right. Mm-hmm. Now, when I was in middle school and high school, even by then I wanted to be published. And I can remember people like Marnie saying, now just write and have fun. And she would say, don't worry about being published. And I see Ms. Coutinho is here as well. She was my 7th grade English teacher. And she would say things like that to me too. Just have fun. Just have fun with it. And it was great advice because I wasn't ready to be published when I was 13 years old. Emotionally, I certainly wasn't mature enough. I really wasn't ready until I was an adult. So I think at this stage, when you are in middle school and high school and college, it really is just about have fun with your writing. Don't worry about getting published yet. Don't worry about making money or anything like that. Just enjoy the process of writing. Just write purely for the joy of it. And then, as time goes on, then you can sort of work into a professional career. But so let me see what other.
Yeah, and we have time for a couple more questions, okay. And we'll have to wrap up. Yeah, there's a what was the first book that you wrote, and what is your favorite book?
Okay. Yeah. So what was the first book you wrote? Okay. So the first book that I wrote was actually right after I had Ms. Coutinho for 7th grade English. It was that summer before 8th grade where I wrote my first novel. It was really more of a novella, like 120 pages. And it was historical fiction. I seem to have a theme. And it's sitting in a box in the attic right now. But I loved it. I had so much fun writing it. It was set during World War II. And it was just sort of an adventure story set during that time period. And I don't have a favorite book. Asking, a writer / librarian their favorite book, it's possible. I have so many books that I love and so many books that I return to again and again over the years. And there are books that I love for different reasons. Like there are some books that I love because the characters are so great and I just want to live with those characters, and so every time I open those pages I'm so happy to be there. So there's lots and lots of different books. I don't think I could choose just one. So instead of really answering that, I'll say sort of a fun fact about me. My name is Anne, A-N-N-E, and I'm named for another Anne with an E, Anne of Green Gables, the wonderful book by Lucy Maud Montgomery, which was written gosh, oh, well over 100 years ago. When my mom was growing up, she loved the book so much, and she told herself if she ever had a daughter, she'd name her after Anne of Green Gables. So I think maybe I was destined to write for children, being named for a children's literary character.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guys have got great questions. Do we have time maybe for one or two more? I'm not sure.
I want to ask the one that we had talked about when you and we had our little practice
Yes.
for this.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned some suggestions that you might have for readers or writers during the pandemic. So I wanted to end with that.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, guys, this pandemic, I mean, this is one of, if not the hardest time periods that any of us will ever go through. And so this is really a good time, actually, to immerse yourself in your art. This is a good time to write or create in any way that you can, because during these tough times, it is so important to find ways to cultivate joy for yourself and to sort of fill up your own well, fill yourself up with joy as much as you can to find that resilience. And so finding ways, whether it's by rereading all of the books by your favorite author, or trying new books, or just writing whatever you want to write every day, those acts of reading, of writing, of creating, that will help to get you through this time. I have no doubt in my mind. And it will build resilience in you, and it will make you a better writer. It really will. Experiencing something tough like this, like living through a pandemic, going through any sort of difficult experience, because it makes you experience these different emotions, it ultimately makes you a much better writer. I'm just going to say briefly, when I was drafting this book, I actually went through the worst time period of my life, and it made me a much better writer. I was writing this, and when I was first working on it, and my husband was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, and it was a total shock. He was super healthy. We were in our 30s, had no idea. He's now cancer free, thank goodness. It was a long road, but we got there. But there were days when I just felt so disheartened, really is the word for it, because I was working full time as a middle school librarian. Our daughter was very young. My husband was extremely ill, very, very ill from chemo and surgeries and everything. But every night I would put my husband to bed because he was so sick. And then I would put my daughter to bed, and then I would write. And writing was a light for me during a dark time. It gave me joy. It gave me a sense of purpose. It provided a wonderful escape for me. And so I really, really encourage all of you to do the same, to really throw yourself into your creativity. I think sometimes when we're going through a really difficult experience, our knee-jerk reaction is to pull back and to say, oh, I've got nothing left in me. I've got nothing in my tank. I can't create. I can't write. I can't do anything. But in fact, once you sort of say, okay, no, I'm going to write, I'm going to read, I'm going to draw, I'm going to do whatever, you will find that you have this wellspring of creativity that is waiting inside of you, and it will bring you joy. It really will, and it will help you to build resilience. So that is my word of encouragement for the day, I think, and I hope all of you can do it.
Say a quick thing, because Kayla will close us up, but
yes.
Thank you, Anne. This was so moving for me as a teacher, and now not so much a writing teacher, but I'm actually copy editing a friend's piece, just, the first copy editor, like the reader, like you say, and yes. It's been a thrill. So, and it was new work for me. I haven't marked anybody's paper in a long time. So thank you.
Wonderful. You so much. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I really I admit I get a little choked up when I see my former teachers and librarians here, because I think it just shows that there is such a great community of folks who love children's literature and who love kids. And so, thank all of you so much for being here. For all of you young writers in the group, okay, you are always free to email me. You can go to my website, www.anneblankman.com. And you will see there is a contact tab, and you can send me an email that way. And I love to hear from readers, and I always email people back. Sometimes it takes me a couple weeks, but I always email you back. Oh, and I see someone here is a middle school librarian. Yeah, for middle school librarians. I love you. I love children's librarians. And for that middle school librarian, just know that once we are back in session, when school's going on, contact me and I will do a Skype visit for free. So happy to do that.
Nice. Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for joining us.
Thank you.
And it's so great to see all the next generation of writers also with us. So it's wonderful.
Oh, and I just have to say this. Look at this. Isabella said, bye. Thank you so much. I'm going to go right now.
Oh.
Beautiful. I want to hear. That's great. Fantastic. Yes. Right. Absolutely. Thank you all so much for having me.